Rusty boys. No one must hear of this. Do you recognize these names?
They are your generals. But I don't see my name.
Be thankful. I named these men as traitors. They're plotting to kill me. They think I will destroy Mother Russia. But you have always stood by me. When I regained the lands stolen by the Europeans and the Chinese, you were there. You fought nobly to make my dream come true. So now, I'm going to give this honor to you.
Death warrants?
Sign them. Reaffirm your loyalty to me by ridding Russia of her enemies.
Curious. Stalin said nothing about the truck Gradenko abandoned.
Containing elements of Iron Curtain.
Yes. We must get it back. I'm sure you'll find a suitable way to handle Comrade Gradenko.
The truck and its contents were abandoned somewhere in this region. The Allies captured the truck and brought it to this way station. They intend to move it to safe territory and study its contents carefully.
This cannot be allowed to happen. We cannot risk recapturing the truck. It is now a liability. Do not allow the truck or any Allied unit to leave the area.
Low power. Our base is under attack.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Waiting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledge. Awaiting. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Waiting. Acknowledge.
Repairing. Building. Repairing.
Comrade. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Repairing.
Affirmative.
Repairing.
Awaiting. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Vehicle reporting. Yes, sir. Acknowledge. Vehicle acknowledge. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Construction complete. Building. Repairing.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Comrade, affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Construction
Vehicle
complete.
acknowledged.
New construction options.
Vehicle acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Building.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Construction complete. Unit ready.
Comrade.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Comrade. Acknowledged.
Construction complete. Building. Repairing. Unit ready. Building. Construction complete. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Construction complete. New construction options. Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting.
Our base is under attack. Construction complete.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Vehicle report. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative.
Lost.
Yes, affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Vehicle reporting.
Unit lost.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Building. Repairing.
Comrade. Acknowledged.
Building.
Acknowledged.
Construction complete. Building. Unit ready.
Vehicle
Building.
affirmative. Acknowledged.
Construction complete. Building.
Waiting
Vehicle
for
acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Insufficient funds.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Construction
Acknowledged.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready.
Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit
Acknowledged.
lost.
Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Acknowledged.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Vehicle report. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Reporting. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Building. On hold. Cancel. Building. Unit lost.
Reporting.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready.
Acknowledged.
Insufficient funds.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Waiting order. Sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Construction
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready.
Vehicle
Ready.
acknowledged. Affirmative.
Base is
Acknowledged.
under attack.
Comrade. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Vehicle affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Vehicle report.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Waiting order. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Vehicle report.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Vehicle report.
Comrade. Acknowledged. Yes, affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready.
Waiting.
Building.
Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Waiting. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Insufficient
Acknowledged.
funds.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Reporting. Vehicle reporting. Reporting. Vehicle acknowledged.
Report. Acknowledged.
Vehicle reporting.
Waiting. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Vehicle acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
All base is under
Report
attack.
acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Awaiting
Unit
orders.
ready.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Report acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Unit
Acknowledged.
lost.
Report. Vehicle report.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Lost.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Reporting.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. 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 Affirmative.
Waiting order. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Building.
Comrade. Acknowledged.
Preparing.
Reporting. Acknowledged.
Preparing.
Waiting acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit
Acknowledged.
lost. Unit lost. Unit repaired.
Comrade. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Waiting
Affirmative.
orders.
Construction complete. Building. Unit lost. Our base is under attack.
Waiting affirmative.
Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit prepared.
Vehicle acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit ready. Building.
Vehicle
Prepared.
affirmative.
Acknowledged.
Insufficient funds.
Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Vehicle reporting. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Awaiting acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Insufficient funds.
Acknowledged.
Unit
Yes,
lost.
sir.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Unit repaired.
Acknowledged.
Unit
Reporting.
ready.
Yes, sir.
Construction
Reporting.
complete.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Preparing. Building.
Waiting
Yes, sir.
orders.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Reporting. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Reporting. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Vehicle reporting. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Vehicle reporting.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Construction complete. Building.
Vehicle report. Affirmative. Awaiting orders.
Waiting for affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Preparing.
Affirmative.
Building.
Reporting. Affirmative. 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 Affirmative.
Construction
Acknowledged.
Unit repaired.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
On hold.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Cancel. Insufficient
Yes,
funds.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Building.
Comrade. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Preparing.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Our base is under attack. Unit ready.
Ready and waiting.
Construction complete. Preparing. Unit repaired.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Building.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Preparing.
Acknowledged.
Construction complete.
Once.
Building. On hold.
Waiting
Orders.
orders. Yes, sir.
Cancel.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Reporting. Agreed. Very well. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Reporting.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Insufficient
Acknowledged.
funds.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Construction complete.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative.
Comrade. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit
Acknowledged.
lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Acknowledged.
Unit
Acknowledged.
lost.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit
Affirmative.
lost. Our base is under attack. Building.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Waiting
Very
orders.
well. Vehicle acknowledged. Yes, sir. Awaiting orders. Affirmative.
Unit
Acknowledged.
lost. Unit ready.
Waiting
Building.
orders.
Unit lost.
Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Waiting orders.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Unit lost.
Reporting. Affirmative. Awaiting orders.
Unit
Yes, sir.
lost.
Yes, sir.
Reporting. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Preparing.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes,
Unit
sir.
ready. Building.
Acknowledged once. Affirmative.
Yes,
Vehicle
sir.
reporting.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Preparing. Structure.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders.
Once. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Unit
Yes, sir.
ready. Building.
Affirmative.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting. Affirmative.
Preparing. Insufficient funds.
Reporting. Awaiting
Yes, sir.
orders. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Preparing.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Base is
Waiting
under
order.
attack.
Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative.
Waiting order.
Preparing.
Waiting order. Awaiting orders. Very well.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Waiting order.
Unit ready. Building.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Insufficient
Vehicle
funds.
reporting. Acknowledged.
Preparing.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Vehicle acknowledged.
Time for a little 5-finger discount.
Battle control terminated. Preparing.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative.
Training. Upgrade complete.
Waiting
Unit
order.
ready. Building.
Yes, sir.
Unit repaired. Repairing. 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 Building. Insufficient funds.
Awaiting orders.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Vehicle acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Reporting. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Base is under attack.
Awaiting order.
Insufficient funds.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Waiting order. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
lost.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Comrade. Affirmative.
Preparing.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Construction
Acknowledged.
Building.
Waiting order. Affirmative. Comrade. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders.
Comrade. Affirmative. Waiting order. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Report. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Construction
Yes,
complete.
affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Comrade. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Construction complete. Building.
Comrade.
Yes, insufficient
Affirmative.
funds.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Comrade. Affirmative. Comrade. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Waiting order. Affirmative. Comrade. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit
Yes,
lost.
affirmative. Acknowledged. Comrade. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Base is
Affirmative.
under attack.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative.
Construction complete.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Comrade. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders.
Preparing. Building.
Waiting order.
Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Reporting.
Insufficient funds. Preparing. On hold. Cancel. Preparing. Construction complete. Unit repaired. Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Repairing.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Insufficient funds. Construction complete. Unit repaired.
Yes, sir.
Preparing.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Building.
Reporting.
Unit
Affirmative.
prepared.
Reporting. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Preparing.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Building. Unit prepared.
Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting
Yes, sir.
order. Affirmative.
Awaiting
Yes, sir.
orders. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Report.
Building.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building. On hold. Cancel.
Acknowledged.
Building.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Reporting. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. At once. Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit ready. Building.
Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Construction
Acknowledged.
complete.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Insufficient
Affirmative.
funds.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Waiting acknowledged. Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Preparing. Building. Unit
Reporting.
ready.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Preparing. Insufficient
Yes,
funds.
sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Our base is under attack.
Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Construction complete.
Vehicle affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Acknowledged. Comrade.
Building.
Reporting.
Unit
Reporting.
prepared.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Repairing.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Construction
Affirmative.
complete.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit
Acknowledged.
prepared.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Insufficient funds.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Vehicle
Waiting.
report.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Construction
Acknowledged.
complete. Repairing. Repairing. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. 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 Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Waiting order. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Unit ready.
Reporting. Acknowledged.
Building.
Comrade, affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Repairing.
Acknowledged.
Comrade, affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Insufficient
Acknowledged.
funds.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Waiting order. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Waiting acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Affirmative. Comrade, acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Ready and
Yes, sir.
waiting.
Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged.
Our base is under attack.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes,
Unit
sir.
lost.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Repairing. Building. Training. Unit ready. Training.
Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Vehicle reporting.
Reporting. Reporting. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Training.
Reporting. Yes, sir.
Unit ready. Repairing. Construction
Ready and
complete.
waiting. Affirmative.
Insufficient funds.
Reporting. Very well. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Repairing. Repairing. Insufficient funds.
Vehicle reporting. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative. Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged.
Repairing.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. At once. Yes, sir. Very well.
Waiting order.
Unit repaired.
Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Repairing.
Awaiting orders. Vehicle reporting.
Unit
Yes, sir.
repaired.
Acknowledged.
Repairing.
Vehicle report. Acknowledged. Reporting.
Unit repaired.
Acknowledged.
Repairing.
Yes, sir.
Unit
Affirmative.
repaired. Repairing.
Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Unit repaired.
Acknowledged.
Insufficient funds.
Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. 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 Affirmative.
Repairing. Repairing. Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Our base is under attack. Construction complete. Repairing. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Construction complete.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Ready. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Affirmative.
Report. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Reporting. Comrade, acknowledged. Comrade, acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Repairing.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Waiting order. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit
Yes,
repaired.
sir. Acknowledged.
Repairing. Building.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Reporting. Awaiting orders. Awaiting
Unit
orders.
prepared.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Building.
Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Repairing.
Reporting.
Unit
Yes,
repaired.
sir. Affirmative.
Repairing.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Reporting.
Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Insufficient funds.
Affirmative.
Unit repaired.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Reporting.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Affirmative.
Our base is under attack.
Reporting. Report acknowledged. Reporting.
Repairing.
Yes, sir.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged.
Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Building. Unit ready. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building. Insufficient funds.
Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders.
Construction complete.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Unit ready. Building. Construction complete.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Building. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Report. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Waiting orders.
Unit lost. Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged.
On hold. Cancel.
Vehicle
Construction
reporting.
complete.
Affirmative.
New construction options. Building.
Vehicle reporting. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Insufficient funds.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged.
Unit
Yes, sir.
ready.
Acknowledged.
Building. Our base is under attack.
Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Report. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready. Building.
Waiting acknowledged.
Vehicle report. Acknowledged.
Building. On hold.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir.
Building.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Comrade, acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Insufficient funds.
Overwhelm and destroy. Creation of
Repairing.
blades. Power to overwhelm and destroy.
Comrade, acknowledged.
Tortured prey.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir.
Building.
Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Power to overwhelm and
Yes, sir.
the product of my tortured brain.
Reporting. Report. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Reporting.
Building.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Comrade. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative. Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Insufficient
Affirmative.
funds.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Comrade. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Vehicle reporting.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
All base is under attack. Repairing. Building.
Comrade. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Waiting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Waiting
Unit
order.
ready.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Reporting.
Construction
Affirmative.
complete.
Acknowledged.
Naval unit lost. Repairing.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Naval unit
Affirmative.
lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building.
Comrade. Affirmative.
Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Comrade.
Insufficient funds.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. Waiting order. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Comrade. Acknowledged. Comrade. Acknowledged.
Report. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Ready and waiting. Agreed.
Building.
Acknowledged. Once.
Reporting. Reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Construction complete.
Affirmative. Waiting order. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Our base is under
Affirmative.
attack. Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Reporting. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir.
Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Waiting order. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Spy plane ready.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Comrade. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Comrade. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Vehicle report. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Comrade. Affirmative.
Yes,
Acknowledged.
sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Vehicle acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes,
Unit
sir.
lost.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Silence needed.
Affirmative.
Silence
Acknowledged.
needed.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Ready and
Unit
affirmative.
lost.
Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Vehicle reporting.
Unit lost.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Comrade.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready. Building.
Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Report. Affirmative. 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 Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit ready. Building.
Vehicle report. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Building. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Unit ready.
Waiting Yes, order. affirmative.
Building.
Acknowledged.
Building. Unit ready. Construction complete. Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Our base is under attack. Construction complete.
Report. Very well. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Structure sold.
Yes, sir. At
Building.
once. Very well. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Comrade.
Construction
Acknowledged.
complete.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Cannot deploy here. Building. Structure sold.
Affirmative. Agreed. Affirmative.
Construction complete. Building. Structure
Yes, sir.
sold.
Reporting. At once. Affirmative. At once.
Construction complete. Cannot deploy here. Primary building selected. Building. Repairing.
Vehicle reporting. Awaiting orders.
Insufficient funds.
Awaiting
Unit
orders.
ready. Building.
Acknowledged.
Unit repaired.
Report acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Comrade, affirmative. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting for acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Reporting at once. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Waiting affirmative. Acknowledged.
Vehicle reporting.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
On hold.
Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Building. On hold.
Affirmative.
Cancel. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Construction complete. Structure sold. Building.
Yes, sir. At once.
On hold. Cancel. Building.
At once.
Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Structure sold.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Vehicle report. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Report affirmative.
Unit lost.
Waiting order. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Very well. At once.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Ready and waiting. Agreed. At once. Awaiting orders.
Agreed. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Building.
Acknowledged. Of course.
Unit
Yes,
lost.
sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unable to comply. Building in progress. Construction complete. Cancel. Building. Construction complete. Building. Construction complete. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit ready. Building.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Unit
Acknowledged.
lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit
Awaiting
ready.
orders. Acknowledged.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Insufficient funds.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Construction
Acknowledged.
complete.
Acknowledged.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready. Building.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting for knowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready. Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Report acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Reporting. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting. Affirmative.
Waiting. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Mission accomplished.